Hello you guys, this little video is going to be all about FOMO, and I've been dealing with chronic pain and chronic illness for about 10 years, and along the way I've had some tips and hacks that I've been told by like occupational therapists, and some that I've heard from pain psychologists. Some of them I guess I've just learned myself like the hard way. Second of all, little practical action we could take is kind of similar to substituting, but can you bring your activities in closer to home, I mean. So I hope that by sharing them with you, you could find them helpful, maybe take some of them away and use them to help you cope with the nasty feeling that is FOMO. Actually just missed a thing just fairly recently. I missed a big thing that I wanted to go to, and yeah, it did not feel good. No, I'm in FOMO Central right now, guys. I suppose there's a lot of regret in it, really. It's like pure, 70% proof regret, and then mixed in with like a little bit disappointment as well. The thing the psychologists tend to say about these kinds of feelings, and again, I'll put some links down in the description for the ways that they describe for coping with these kinds of things. But maybe one of the ways that we could start looking at it is, as people, like, we always want to try and fix things, don't we? We always want to try, we have this icky feeling, really negative, horrible feeling inside us, and we just want to get rid of it. We're just like, get rid. And so by trying to get rid of it, we're kind of almost making it bigger or making it worse. That's the theory. So some feelings just can't be fixed, but we can recognize them, and we can kind of try and get a little distance from them sometimes. So one of the techniques that psychologists teach, particularly in relation to chronic pain and chronic illness, is observing the thought and watching it float away. So you imagine that you're looking at a river, there are leaves floating by in the water of the river, and you take your horrible feelings or your negative thoughts and you kind of place it on the leaf and it floats away. Now for me, I mean, it's not like it's, that's bish bash bosh, the thought's gone or the feeling's gone. But I think what they're trying to do is just you get a little distance from it, right? So it's what they call the observer, I think, stance. So you're not in the feeling if you're watching it, right? And by getting that distance, you get a little bit of what I would call like a little bit of comfort. There's a little bit of more maybe breathing space. You got breathing space from the feeling, so you can just go. So that's one of the first things, first out of the gate, that you can look at. What is basically emotional distress that goes along with living with chronic pain and chronic illness? Some practical ideas. Okay, what can we do practically to reduce the feeling of FOMO? Because I think one of the things that can happen as well quite easily is it sort of gets into fully fledged like loneliness and isolation. It's a bit like when during the pandemic, people found it really difficult to cope with being indoors all the time and not being able to, go places and do stuff. But we cope with that feeling like all the time. And yeah, you kind of get to the point where you feel maybe like life is really passing you by. And the other thing, I think, in this, I hope, maybe you haven't had this experience, but if you have, I can relate to what you're going through, which is the feeling that you just stop making any memories. Okay, so the first practical action will be thinking about substitution. So say you were a member of a football team or soccer team or something like that, and it was a social thing for you. It was every week and your friends are there, is there something that you could substitute that would give you like a similar feeling of well-being, some kind of mental stimulation and even physical stimulation? A lot of people do crafting now, and there is, I think, I read somewhere that, yeah, there was a study done that there's good evidence, I think, that doing something like fine movement with your hands activates like calming areas of the brain, they think. So that could be something worth trying out. It kind of, all of this depends on your own personal setup, of course. Like, you might not have space in your house for crafting if you've got a full house, I heard a really good point recently, which is that some of the advice about insomnia is that you should, if you can, move away from your bedroom to, like, say, ideally, a chair or something in another room, rather than doing triple axels in the bed, like trying to get back to sleep. You take yourself off to another space, so maybe like your sofa in your living room. But if you rent a room in a shared house, then there might not be a living room, okay? There might just be like a kitchenette, and then everyone has their own bedroom. So, each one of these tips or hacks that kind of depend on your own personal living situation as well. But maybe you want something a bit more physical, okay? So what about singing? Can you join a choir? Now, the thing about singing is it does take energy and it takes stamina. I tried to join a choir before, couldn't do it. But then at the time, I actually was still trying to get to the venue without a mobility aid, using public transport. So I think it's possible that the journey to the venue was so exhausting that I kind of couldn't participate by the time I was actually in the choir practice. And when I was there, I did see a lady actually who had a mobility scooter, and she had used the mobility scooter to get there, and then saved the energy, and her pain levels, hadn't ramped up while she was trying to get there, and then she was able to enjoy the practice. So, is there a way for you to somehow kind of get to the venue maybe more easily? Or is there, someone you can ask for help, maybe like a neighbor, maybe could give you a ride? Like, it's totally understandable if you don't want to impose on your neighbor, but like, if it's the choice is between that and isolation, or not having any kind of activity that gives you a bit of inspiration, then yeah, you're probably better off just asking for the ride, really. Oh, actually, I should say lift, because in Ireland, where I'm from, ride means something else entirely. Second of all, little practical action we could take is kind of similar to substituting, but can you bring your activities in closer to home? So is there like a more local group that you could join in? It kind of, again, depends on your living situation. If you're in a super rural, like isolated spot, it's not so easy, is it? But if you're in a village or a suburb, then maybe there's something just around the corner that you never knew about, right? Because you never needed to access it before. But now is the time to look into it and stick your head around the door. If it's a little bit intimidating, which it can be, to go to new places, you could look them up online, give them a little email or a call first or something, and maybe a kind friend would go with you, like the first time you're going down there, something along those lines. I've been surprised by the things that are available closer to where I live that I kind of didn't know about before. I was actively looking for them, and sometimes it can be easy to miss things in your local area just because they're, you're commuting all the time to work, or you're busy or whatever, and it never occurred to you. Why would it? But they're there, and so you can try and maybe like reach out for that kind of thing as well. It turn into a whole new hobby for you. There are so many types of events we can miss out on. Weddings, parties, graduation, prom, all sorts of like important like life events really. And then the kind of the last practical tip that I had was well, I just mentioned it actually back earlier in the video, which was, would introducing a mobility aid into your life, would that help you to get to things? I was given advice about getting an electric wheelchair by an occupational therapist. I'm not suggesting that getting a mobility aid could take away 100% of your FOMO, but it might help with like 50%. And that's something, isn't it? That's not nothing. Now, it does obviously depend on the venue and whether the venue's accessible. It also depends on the type of mobility aid that you can use. Some mobility scooters are designed to be left outside premises, and then you make your way around the venue yourself. Whereas, for example, electric wheelchairs aren't really designed to be like left outside, like in the rain and stuff. And also, electric wheelchairs have tighter turning circles than some mobility scooters, so they can move in tighter spaces. The one that I have is designed to work both inside someone's house and out and about. And that has its pros and cons. I'm going to make a video soon on my electric wheelchair because I really like it. And the thing about electric wheelchairs, I think it was difficult for me to find it, was because it's not like you can say to someone, oh, like you can say to someone about a car, oh, I notice you drive like Ford Focus, like what's that like? What's that like to drive? And like everyone, loads of people have cars, Whereas it was kind of hard to find information about electric wheelchairs because I didn't know anyone that owned one. In the end, I got a little bit of advice from an occupational therapist, which was useful. And I also got advice just from joining a Facebook group. The reason why I have an electric wheelchair is because my arms are so painful that I can't hold them out to drive a scooter. I can't really hold them out that long. So using a mobility aid to reduce this dreaded FOMO, it depends on the venue. It also depends on if you're using the train or underground, like a metro or a subway. Some of those stations aren't wheelchair accessible, so they don't have, for example, step-free access. In order to get off a platform, maybe you have to go up steps and over a bridge and down steps to get off onto the roadway. So the second platform basically is sort of inside the station, if that makes sense, and there's no way to get off that platform without going up the steps. And a lot of stations in England are still like that. You might be able to find ways around that by disembarking at an earlier station or a later station. Some of the train lines, they do actually offer, I think, to pick you up from whichever station is closest. Looking back on it, it hadn't occurred to me to get an electric wheelchair, and if it wasn't for the advice I got from that occupational therapist, I'm not sure that it would have occurred to me, because I had this crazy idea that I wasn't like disabled enough to use a mobility aid, and that I should keep trying to, power through the pain that I was in every day. And I think what I realized about that, which is kind of hard, is that it's kind of an internal ableism. So we look at, disabled people and we think, oh, that person is in a wheelchair because they can't use their legs. But actually there are lots of reasons for people to be using a wheelchair, and it's a bit, well, I suppose at best it's lacking in imagination, isn't it? To not be able to kind of see that. But at worst, it's kind of a judgmental thing. She was very upfront and kind of forthright about it. And she just said, look, are you like in agony when you're in a supermarket or a shop? And I was like, yeah, most of the time, yeah. And she just said, well, then you need a mobility aid. You need one. It is kind of crazy that I needed to have that pointed out to me in that way. But I also think it taught me that, you know, it just goes to show how much of like blinders, you know, we can have on about our own situations. So it's not gonna fix everything and totally eliminate your FOMO. And there are going to be those days when, you know, you're just too ill to go anywhere. And yeah, it's a bummer. It is a major, major bummer when those days hit. So those are some of my hacks, you guys, for handling FOMO. I really hope that you found them useful. And if you did, maybe hit the like or subscribe buttons. I hope I see you on the next one. And in the meantime, take care of yourself. If you can, get some time. I hope you can take it easy. And whatever you do, be gentle on yourself.